Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Mikaila, and I'm going to be talking about community with you today. So, who in the room has an idea of what community is? You can give me a raised hand if that's a maybe. Okay, we got majority of the room. Amazing. So, it's not a new concept to a lot of us, but for today's talk, I'm going to keep our perspective quite broad. And I've landed on a definition by Robert Putnam in his work, Bowling Alone. Community is a place where people come together to support and help each other, fostering a sense of belonging and togetherness. So 2 key things I want you to note here. 1, it's a group of people coming together. So other than to support and help each other, we haven't really defined a more specific reason. And 2, the impact of that. Sensation of belonging and togetherness. So as I talk about community for the rest of the time, this is what I'll be referring to. So we're actually going to be exploring the future of community, but before we get to that, I want to get us grounded in the past and present of community. So let's start with the past. Owen Eastwood, in his work Belonging, gathers information from evolutionary psychologists and basically explaining why humans needed community in the first place. And one of the kind of core concepts that come up is that for over 99% of human history, our ancestors lived in these really strongly bonded groups, known as hunter and gatherers. So these strongly bonded groups were our ancestors' super strength, and their survival depended on it. Meaning, if you didn't cooperate, you could get kicked out of the group, and that would impact your survival rate, or the group's survival rate would be impacted. And so this is why it's believed that we have this psychological need towards connection and cooperation, because for over 99% of our brains have been developed when it was essential for it. And then on the flip side, we know what it's like when this absence of these strong bonds are. So if you're feeling insecure over not belonging in a group setting, which happens, sometimes, your sympathetic nervous system actually kicks in. So stress hormones, adrenaline, you can experience tunnel vision. Our ability to communicate is actually reduced. Eye contact is really hard to make. And so this all indicates that the sensation of belonging, we like to think, is all fluffy, and it's good for the mental health, but also impacts our physical well-being as well. So thanks to our ancestors, we can start to see why community matters. Let's fast forward and look at how communities are doing today. So in some ways, we're the most connected we've ever been. Thanks to technology, you can pick up your phone at any point and send your meme to 100 closest friends. And you're able to connect with our communities like we've never before. We've been able to break down geographic boundaries. Communities now exist that would have never existed pre-intranet. During the pandemic, I was working with this group called the Social Experiment. And basically, we were able to facilitate this online program for people in New Zealand, young adults in New Zealand, learning how to develop their leadership capabilities and work within their own communities by co-designing. And I was able to do this at home in Canada with the rest of my team calling in around the world. So there's examples like this, and there's thousands more that show us that we're seeing an explosion of community building, accessibility, diversity, and opportunity. So that's the really good stuff. What about the not so good stuff? So we may be more connected than we've ever been before, but there's numerous studies indicating that we're lonelier than ever. Show of hands here in the room who's ever been in a room and felt really alone. Yeah, it's not an unknown feeling for a lot of us. Dr. Vivek Murthy, the 19th and 21st Surgeon General of the United States, explains this concept really well. He went on a cross-country listening tour through the states and saw how prevalent loneliness is impacting us, with around 1 in 2 American adults seeing kind of high rates of it. And he defines loneliness as a subjective feeling of not having enough social connection in your life, which is distinct from isolation, because that's whether or not you have people around you. What matters with loneliness is that strength and quality of social connection. So what do these high rates of loneliness tell us? We may have a limitless access to communities today, but we're not seeing the social connection that we need. That sensation of belonging, togetherness, we know is crucial for our well-being. So what does that mean for our communities going forward? Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a moment. I've just thrown lots of facts and ideas and concepts at you. And I'd like to take a moment actually right now to get over our thinking brains and into the room a little bit more, because I'm going to change tact for the presentation. It's going to be a little more reflective. So if you like, it's completely optional, but I'm going to give you some cues. You can follow along, but also don't worry if you don't want to. So if you're following along, you're going to plant both feet on the floor if you can. And maybe notice the tips of your toes kind of lift and then come back down. Your heels lift and come back down. And then maybe with your eyes, you scan behind you. It doesn't matter which direction, just to the back of the wall. Maybe the eyes lift, come back down, and we're going to scan in the other direction. Just, you're kind of taking in your surroundings, up and down. Then we're going to bring the gaze forward. You can land the gaze in front of you. Maybe you close down the eyes slightly, or you keep them open. And see if you can feel where your seat touches this, your bum touches the seat essentially. Inhale maybe through the nose here, and then exhale out the mouth. Okay, we'll come back into the room. So that was a nice little grounding exercise. So, future of community. Are we doomed? Are we gonna thrive? I'd love to give you my best prediction, but honestly, it kind of depends on the day and my mood regarding humanity. So what I'd rather do is bring you into the conversation around community and have you reflect on your own relationships with community. Because the truth is, how we all interact with our communities is going to impact it. So for this portion of the talk, I'm going to weave in stories from my life, from the communities I work with, the communities I draw inspiration with, and I'm going to give you some questions as well. So just feel free to listen, reflect, and really notice if something lands for you specifically. So we're going to start at the obvious place. When we think of community, we typically think of connection with other people. The group that I was working with in New Zealand, we had participants actually go out and interview the general public, asking them what community meant to them. And a lot of the time, people came back and said, well, community to me is, a group of people that needs help in some way or some shape or way, but the description usually didn't include themselves, which I find interesting. It's almost like we see ourselves as individual person over here, and all the groups of communities kind of exist outside of us. And it's not wrong. There are a lot of communities that you'll never be a part of, but there are a lot of communities that you are a part of. And so one of the first things I urge you to do when you're thinking of community is A, acknowledge the communities that you're in. So take a moment, reflect on your current communities. This could be your family, this could be immediate, chosen, extended, and all the different layers in that. Think of school, work, social activities, events that you go to, online communities, political communities, ideological communities, ethnic communities, religious communities. The list goes on and on. My point is, if we want to be an active part of our communities, we A, have to acknowledge the ones we're in and stop seeing ourselves as separate. Okay, so A is acknowledge. B, let's get intentional with our communities. So the next story that I'm going to share with you is about a group in Edinburgh that I work with called Skip the Small Talk, and they host events that basically do just that. Ashley, the founder of Skip the Small Talk, was volunteering at a suicide hotline and noticed that people were calling in who weren't necessarily suicidal, however, they needed to have these deep chats. And in that, when Ashley would ask them whether or not they had people to talk about this stuff with, a lot of the time they did, they just weren't comfortable sharing with them. So an idea was born. What if you created an event that had people come together and practice communicating in ways that we actually need? Would people even show up? And it turns out people did, so now Skip the Small Talk hosts events across America and also Europe. And what I like about this story is that it reminds us we need to practice at engaging. No one comes out of the womb communicating like an all-star communicationist. We learn our communication style, and therefore, you can change it. So when we're thinking about connecting with others, you can start thinking, how do you interact with the people in your communities, as an active agent of that? Do you leave feeling connected, disconnected, both? And start noticing how you feel when you leave your communities. Okay. So the next story I want to share with you is about tech startups in the UK. So it's techy, it's innovative, and there's a few women working their way up in senior leadership and operations. And I'm going to sum up operations as kind of like the get stuff done team. And in all the doingness and all the busyness, there's also loneliness. There's a lack of resources. There's a lack of support. And these women recognize the power of being able to learn from another peer and be able to get that connection from someone going through a similar day-to-day as you, right? And so they created a community. It started off as a monthly meetup, and then it grew to be over 2,000 operational professionals worldwide on this online platform now known as Operations Nations. And I like this story because it reminds us that we can create the communities that the world is missing. as niche as they are. And sometimes the niche are the better. And sometimes you have to be the first one to make that first step. And so some things to reflect on here is, are there any areas in your life that you feel like connection with others is missing? That you feel like there's a gap? And then what's one small thing you could do to build connection in this area? You don't necessarily have to start a community, but one small thing. Okay, so A is acknowledge, B is be intentional, C is create, D does not start with D because it just doesn't. I tried. But it's the power of the shared vision. And I think it's just as important. So Edinburgh Community Yoga is a social enterprise that brings free or subsidized yoga to everyone in Edinburgh, or almost as everyone they can in Edinburgh as possible. And I'm a yoga teacher. I know we love to say everyone's welcome, access to all, but the barriers that actually get people into the door go far deeper than that. And so Edinburgh Community Yoga works endlessly at bringing yoga to these socioeconomically deprived areas that don't have a yoga studio on the corner. They bring them to prisons, they bring yoga to mental health groups, to charities, to trauma groups, to recovery centers, and that's just to name some of their outreach programs. And in doing all of that, they've created a shared vision of what they want, of what the health and well-being world to look like. Access and inclusivity at its core. And whenever I go or teach at a class, every single person in that room is brought into that shared vision. I don't have to say anything. Everyone just knows. And I think this is so powerful because communities have the ability to offer us hope for the future. They can bring us in a shared vision together. And it's a lot stronger with other people than just yourself. So something to reflect here is to reflect on the visions you want to see in the world, and then go or create the communities that you want to see in this area. Okay, amazing. So that was on connection to others. Now I'm going to kind of talk about another really important element to community, but it's not something you might necessarily think of all the time when you think of community. Connection to ourselves. So Brené Brown, the vulnerability researcher and author, defines belonging as the ability to find sacredness in both being part of something, but also the courage to stand alone. And I like this because there's two kind of interesting parts here. We have the connection to others, and we have the connection to ourselves. And I've seen firsthand what it's like not to connect with yourself, so I'm going to share a little bit about my story now. So I identify as a recovering people pleaser. And when I was a kid, I basically learned that I could chameleon or shapeshift into most group settings and adapt into that setting. And so what I'd do is I'd understand what good looked like, and then I'd become a variation of that. And from the outside, it looked like I belonged. I was a part of a lot of communities, a lot of groups, and some of them were wonderful. But from the inside, it was getting lonelier and lonelier. And this went well into my 20s. And I drill it down to this. I never felt like I belonged in my communities because it wasn't me showing up. I wasn't letting myself belong. And I don't think I'm the only person that has experienced this type of disconnection before. So how do we bring our authentic selves into communities? That's a good question. We develop a lifelong relationship with ourselves. We learn how to connect. So think of some trademark things in any strong relationship that you have. For me, it's listening, care, acceptance, trust. And figure out what yours are, and then actively work on giving yourself those every single day. And when you don't give them to yourself because it's hard, give yourself compassion for just trying. And I think how you do this specifically will be unique to you. Everyone's relationship to themselves is completely unique to themselves. There is research to suggest that practices like meditation, journaling, time spent in nature, other mindful practices help cultivate this relationship. However, I urge you, don't ask the world or your Instagram feed what you need. Ask yourself. Oh, I'm moving too fast. Oh, thanks for being patient with me. When in your life do you feel most connected to yourself? What are you doing? Who, what are you around? And how can you explore that deeper today and tomorrow? Okay, so I know we already got a little bit ahead of ourselves. But connection to ourselves, connection to others, let's talk about the last missing piece. So remember the definition that I talked about at the beginning, specifically, community is a group of people. I want to challenge that now. What if we expand our view of community beyond people, to our surroundings, our wider ecosystem, to the natural world? In Western culture, it can seem odd to consider community beyond humans, but I think this is something we used to be very aware of. And there's a quote actually by the primatologist Isabel Banke in Lost Connections by Johann Hari that I really like to present myself to. We've been vertebrates for nearly 500 million years now. We've been mammals for 250 to 300 million years. We've been primates for 65 million years. When did we seem to forget this? I'm inspired by communities that haven't forgotten this. Back in Canada, I was working with the First Nation communities and saw what it meant to have this connection to the world embedded in your culture's language and teachings and just how you interacted with the world. There's an author, Robin Kimmerer, in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, that describes this really beautifully. Basically, there's a comparison that the English language is made up of 70% nouns, so we really like our things in English. Whereas in Potawatomi, an indigenous language in Eastern North America, it's made up of 70% verbs. So things that we only consider as things in English are considered as beings in Potawatomi. They move and act in relation to us. The relationship, or the language itself, creates a relationship with the natural world. And I think this shows us that we know how to have a relationship with the natural world. We've done it before. And by connecting with the world in a way that kind of furthers that connection, not only does it shift something inside of us and how we interact with the world, it also shifts how we view ourselves. If you knew you belonged to the world, it shifts something on a very fundamental level. If you knew that wholeheartedly that you belonged, how would you move through life? It'd be lovely. So if I leave you with anything today, I hope it's this. Community is a massive part of our evolution as humans and will continue to be so. They are the sum of their parts, and you're included in that. You have agency with the communities that you're a part of, the ones you may create, the ones you choose to share your vision with. And how you connect with yourself, how you connect with others, how you connect to the world, it matters. Because who you are and what you do from that place of connection and belonging, that's powerful. So how about we make that the future of community?